When my daughter's husband smirked across the dinner table and told me, "We'll handle your estate once you're gone," I didn't argue. I just nodded and took another bite of my roast beef. 2 weeks later, their bank accounts were frozen, their business seized, and the house they loved so much had a new owner, me. They still do not know how I pulled it off, but they know I will never forgive them. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. It was a Sunday in mid-September when I got the invitation for family dinner at Claire's place. She was my only child, my pride and joy, the one I'd raised single-handedly after her mother, Nora, died from a brain aneurysm when Claire was 11. I can still see the doctor's hand on my shoulder, that quiet, practiced sympathy that leaves you with more silence than comfort. From then on it was just us, school pickups in my rig between runs, cold pizza on tailgates outside parent-teacher meetings, and the promise I made to my little girl when we scattered her mother's ashes at Swan Point, "Everything I build for you." The trucking business, the lake cabin, the slow, sturdy investments no one brags about but everyone needs, she'd grown up knowing it would all be hers one day. I never doubted she'd honor that trust. The drive to their subdivision took me past the old feed store and the new yoga studio that replaced it, Progress or Camouflage, depending on who you ask. Their street curled like a question mark around identical lawns and trimmed maples. Claire and Brent's house, a cream two-story with black shutters, looked like it had been assembled from a catalog and sealed in plastic. Even their mailbox matched the neighbors right down to the decorative finial. The moment I stepped through their front door, I felt something was off. The house always smells faintly of cloves because Claire loves those plug-in warmers, but there was a sharper edge to it that night, like cinnamon hiding bleach. Music drifted from a countertop speaker, light, forgettable piano meant to fill gaps in conversation. A new rug had replaced the old one, and a new console table had replaced the old new one. Claire's seasons move on a credit card cycle. She came down the hall wiping her hands on a dish towel, hair twisted into a loose knot the way her mother used to wear it on busy days. That should have warned me. Instead, her hug had the softness and distance you give a neighbor you barely know. Her body stayed a half-inch from mine. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You look good, Dad," she said. "You too, kiddo." Her eyes flicked past me to the door as if she was timing people's arrivals at an event. Claire has a way of measuring a room without a tape, how polished the forks are, whether the conversation leans to her advantage, if everyone is comfortable but not so comfortable that they forget who arranged the evening. It served her well when she ran fundraising galas at the hospital. It serves her less well in a marriage. Brent arrived from the kitchen wiping an already clean counter towel, shoulders squared like a man about to pitch a product he knows is overpriced. Overly cheerful, the fake kind that squeaks when you push on it. His hair was clipped to the grain, and he wore a watch with a face big enough to land small planes on. Brent calls himself a real estate developer, mostly he flips ranchers after painting them gray and staging them with furniture that makes you miss your grandmother's house. He met Claire at a charity I sponsored for the fire department 4 years back. He laughed too hard at my jokes and took a picture with my rig like it would boost his profile. I wanted to like him, and for a while I did. He calls me Jack instead of Dad, which I never minded, but he says it the way some men say, buddy, right before they send an invoice. Jack. There he is, he boomed, clapping my shoulder and steering me toward the dining room with a salesman's gentle force. You're just in time. Claire's roast is next level. Smells good, I said. The dining table was already set for 4, water glasses sweating on neat coasters, cloth napkins folded like tiny tents, the good plates with the blue band that I bought them their first Christmas as a married couple. A centerpiece of eucalyptus sat a little too tall, making you tilt to see the person across from you. Brent loves tall centerpieces. He says they scream taste. Sophie was already in her chair, feet swinging like pendulums. 8 years old and all elbows and sparkly barrettes, she is the only person in that house who never performs. Her front tooth was finally loose, she showed me, wiggling it with the kind of pride that only comes from owning a small miracle. She had drawn a picture for me, our lake cabin with two stick figures on the dock holding fishing poles. One was labeled Grandpa in purple marker. The other said me in pink. She'd even drawn the old aluminum canoe, right down to the dent from the summer I misjudged a submerged stump. Sophie notices everything, but she isn't suspicious about any of it yet. God, I hope she gets to keep some of that. We made small talk through salad. Claire asked about my knee, she remembers the weather through my joints. I told her it twinged when the wind came out of the west, which made Sophie ask how you can feel a direction. Brent chuckled like he planned to quote that on social media later. There was a new framed photo on the buffet of Brent at a ribbon cutting downtown, his hand on a gold-painted shovel like he'd invented dirt. In another frame, Claire stood beside him in a cream dress, smiling the careful smile she uses when she is tired. Business good? I asked, glancing toward the photo. Always, Brent said. Market's changing, but change is opportunity. He said it like a line learned in the mirror. Claire's fork made a neat, nervous tick each time it touched the plate. I asked after her work at the hospital foundation, but she answered with the bare minimum and moved the conversation to Sophie's school project on state birds. When she does not want to talk about something, she opens a window and lets the topic drift out. I looked around their dining room the way a man looks around a loading dock, checking the weight of things. The rug under my feet cost more than my first truck. The pendant light above us had Edison bulbs that throw a flattering light on faces and a harsh one on intentions. On the wall, there was a photo of the three of them at the lake cabin, caught at sunset, a borrowed gold in their hair. That cabin is cedar and breezes to me. To Brent, it is an asset you can leverage. The roast beef came out on a platter that had belonged to Nora's mother, a heavy white oval with a hairline crack that has held more family meals than I can count. Claire set it down with ceremony and went back for the potatoes and carrots, rosemary sprigs tucked in like bayonets. Brent poured wine into everyone's glasses, even mine, though I never drink more than a sip when I plan to drive. He topped off Claire's glass without her asking. She did not protest, but her eyes cut sideways for a heartbeat. Marriage is a language you learn by ear. We traded the kind of memories that keep peace, the time Sophie fed a gull at the lake and ended up with a dozen more swooping in, the way Nora used to hum when she carved roast beef, the summer Claire refused to come out of the water because she believed her toes could grow gills if she stayed long enough. Sophie laughed at that and asked if gills run in families. I told her some things do, and some things you build yourself. The moment the main course hit the table, roast beef with rosemary potatoes, Brent leaned back, hooked his elbow over the chair like a man settling into ownership, and smiled at me the way men smile right before they slide a contract across the table. A sales pitch has a smell if you've spent as many years in freight as I have, a mix of confidence and hurry. He had both. Claire's hands went still in her lap. Sophie's fork paused midair, a carrot making a perfect orange comma. You know, Jack, Brent said, slicing into his meat like he was practicing for some boardroom demonstration, Claire and I have been talking about the future. Yours or mine? I asked lightly, though something in the way he squared his shoulders told me I might not like the answer. He chuckled, the short, performative kind you give when you want someone to think you're on friendly terms. Both, actually. See, it's only logical for us to start managing things now, while you're still around to guide us. Claire's fork hovered over her plate. She didn't look up. I set my own fork down. Managing what exactly? Your estate, Brent said, as casually as if he were asking me to pass the salt. The properties, the business shares, your accounts. We'd like to get everything transferred over now. Makes things cleaner later. And hey, less paperwork after you're gone. After I'm gone. I turned my gaze to my daughter. Claire. She drew in a breath, her eyes fixed on the gravy pooling around her potatoes. It just makes sense, Dad. This way, we can make sure everything stays in the family. In the family? I repeated slowly. Brent smirked. Exactly. I smiled back just enough to keep them from seeing the shift in my pulse. All right. I'll think about it. The rest of the meal unfolded in a strange kind of civility. Sophie filled the air with excited chatter about her school project, waving her little hands as she explained it, oblivious to the frost between the adults. Brent nodded in feigned interest, Claire managed the occasional tight smile, and I listened, while my mind quietly rewrote the terms of this unspoken war. They thought they were talking to the same Jack who had always given without question. They had no idea that man no longer existed. On the drive home that night, their voices kept looping in my head. Not the words themselves, but the tone, the assumption. The way Brent spoke like the decision was already made, and Claire's silence sealed it. And with each mile, little memories I'd buried began clawing their way to the surface. The Christmas they forgot to invite me to the cabin until 2 days before, when all the good rooms were already taken by Brent's family. I ended up in the damp basement guest room, while his father sat in my old leather chair by the fire like it had always been his. The time they borrowed my truck for a week, because Brent's was in the shop, and returned it 3 months later with a dent the size of a basketball in the side panel and no offer to fix it. Claire once asked to hang on to a set of spare keys to my lake cabin for emergencies, only for me to find out from a neighbor that they'd been hosting their friends there, full weekends without so much as a call to let me know. There was my last birthday dinner, when Brent raised his glass and made a toast about the old guard stepping aside for the next generation. Claire laughed into her wine, but when our eyes met, she didn't stop. And I can still hear Sophie's little voice calling me one Sunday morning to ask why I hadn't come to see her new bike. I didn't know she had one. Brent had taken her shopping 2 weeks earlier and never told me. Individually, each moment was a splinter, small enough to ignore if you didn't look too closely. But that night, sitting behind the wheel in the dark, I saw them for what they were, years of taking, diminishing, excluding, until they finally decided to claim the whole tree. The truth hit me hard and cold. This wasn't about keeping it in the family. It was about cutting me out of it. For the next week, I wore the mask of the agreeable old man. I called Claire every other day, asked about Sophie's school projects, even pretended to take an interest in Brent's latest development deal. I told them I was getting my affairs in order, that I wanted them involved, that I valued their input. Every word tasted like copper in my mouth, but I made sure they only heard warmth. I even offered to have Brent look over some papers I claimed needed organizing. He lit up like a man who'd just been handed a winning lottery ticket. I imagined him at home later that night, telling Claire that the old man was finally ready to hand over the keys. Meanwhile, I reached out to an old friend, Martin Lacey, a retired corporate attorney who owed me more than a few favors from my trucking days. Martin was the kind of man who could take apart a contract with the same efficiency I used to strip down an engine block. We'd been through some scrapes together, the kind that leave you either bound for life or sworn enemies. Lucky for me, we were the former. We met at his kitchen table, a sturdy oak slab scarred with the grooves of decades-old coffee mugs and the stray mark of a carpenter's pencil. Martin poured me a cup without asking, the way friends do. "Jack, I'm assuming you don't actually want them to manage a thing," he said after I laid out the situation. "I want them to think they're getting exactly what they want," I replied, staring into the steam curling off my cup. He chuckled, a dry rasp that came from years of reading the fine print others ignored. "A classic setup. You'll need bait, something they can't resist, and a timeline that forces them to act fast. Do you have the stomach for this?" I met his eyes. "I raised a daughter who's plotting to strip me clean while I'm still breathing. I think I've got the stomach for it." The truth was, my stomach felt like a clenched fist, but not from doubt, from the raw, bitter clarity of knowing blood meant nothing if respect was gone. Over coffee at his place, we sketched the plan. It would involve creating a new will and transferring assets in a way that looked generous, but was actually a legal dead end for them. The key was control. I'd make it seem like I was signing things over, while actually locking everything inside an ironclad trust they couldn't touch, no matter how they tried. By the time I left Martin's, the sun was low, bleeding orange across the rooftops. My chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. The betrayal still burned, but now I had a direction for the fire. I invited my daughter and son-in-law over the following Friday under the guise of a big decision. I kept my tone on the phone warm, almost deferential, the voice of a man finally ready to let go of the wheel. That alone must have set their imaginations running. When they arrived, I made sure the living room was tidy but not staged. Just my old armchair, the coffee table polished enough to make a good impression, and a stack of documents sitting in plain view. The papers were like bait in the center of a well-set trap. "I've been thinking about our talk," I began once we'd all sat down. "And you're right, better to get things in order now than leave a mess later." Their eyes lit up in unison, just like slot machines hitting jackpot. Brent leaned forward, elbows on his knees, a predator smelling the kill. Claire's lips curved into a faint smile she tried to hide behind a sip of coffee. "I had Martin draw up the papers," I said, sliding the stack across the table. "This will move all my major assets into your management immediately. You'll have authority to run things, collect income, pay bills, the works." Brent took the top page like it was a deed to a kingdom. His eyes darted across the text, and with every line, his grin spread wider. I could almost hear the gears turning, which properties to sell first, which accounts to drain, which of his business deals would suddenly have unlimited funding. Claire reached for the pen before Brent even finished his scan. She tried to keep her expression measured, but her hands betrayed her, trembling ever so slightly as she shuffled the pages. I couldn't tell if it was excitement, nerves, or both. "Of course," I added smoothly, "I'll remain a beneficiary while I'm alive, so I can still enjoy the cabin and a bit of spending money." "Of course," Brent echoed without missing a beat, already imagining himself king of the empire. They didn't notice how I never once said they would own anything outright. They didn't think to ask why the signature lines were where they were, or why the wording was so meticulous. To them, the pages in front of them were an open vault. To me, they were a locked door, one I held the only key to. When the pen scratched across the paper, I watched the ink soak into the fibers like the sealing of a fate. They signed every line Martin's perfectly crafted forms instructed them to. And with every signature, they walked themselves deeper into the corral. What they didn't know was that the fine print placed every single asset into an irrevocable trust, with me as the sole trustee and them as contingent beneficiaries only upon my death, provided they met certain moral and financial obligations. Obligations they would fail spectacularly in the weeks to come. And when they did, they wouldn't lose a few things. They would lose everything. Over the next month, I fed them just enough rope. I told Brent he could practice managing the cabin rental income. He didn't ask any questions, didn't even check the ledger, just started moving money around like it was pocket change. He hired a friend to upgrade the deck without consulting me, paying double the going rate. A week later, I overheard him on the phone bragging about getting a sweet $4,000 side bonus from the job. My deck didn't need replacing, but Brent's ego did like shiny things. I gave Claire authority over one of my smaller investment accounts, seeded with $20,000. I framed it as a test of her management skills, told her I trusted her to be careful. Within a fortnight, she drained most of it for what she called networking opportunities, a long weekend in Napa with 3 of her friends, all spa treatments and wine tastings. When she posted the trip online, she captioned it "Investing in my future." Not a penny went back into the account. Even Sophie got pulled into their carelessness. One afternoon when I stopped by unannounced, she was at the kitchen table eating cold cereal for dinner while Claire and Brent were upstairs, getting ready for a charity gala. Sophie told me she was not invited because it's for grown-ups, and that Mommy said Grandpa would buy her pizza tomorrow to make up for it. I did, but the taste in my mouth wasn't from the pepperoni. They had no idea I was keeping a detailed record of everything, receipts, bank statements, even the time-stamped photos of Claire's Napa trip and Brent's new truck, bought outright from the cabin account. I kept it all neatly filed in a folder labeled House Maintenance, which I suspected they'd never touch. But their toxicity wasn't just about money. It was in the way Claire referred to the cabin as our property when talking to friends. The way Brent joked about moving the old man into a condo so they could really enjoy the lake house. The little digs during family dinners, comments about my outdated business practices, Claire sighing about how I never learned to relax, Brent suggesting Sophie would benefit from a more modern upbringing. Each remark was a scratch on the paint, a reminder that they didn't just want my assets, they thought they deserved them more than I did. So I let them keep going. Spending. Boasting. Crossing lines they didn't even bother to see. And all the while, I could hear Martin's voice in my head, let them hang themselves. By the time the month was over, they'd tied the noose, knotted it twice, and pulled it snug around their own necks. It was a Tuesday morning when I decided to pull the trigger. I wanted the timing to be inconvenient, not catastrophic, but enough to make them sweat. I chose the exact day Brent was finalizing a major property acquisition, and Claire was chairing a luncheon for the hospital foundation. By noon, every account they had access to was frozen. The cabin rental portal was locked, the investment account Claire had drained was flagged for misuse, and the automatic withdrawals Brent had set up for his personal expenses bounced. Then the first call came. What the hell is going on? Brent's voice was tight, the kind of tight that comes from realizing your credit card just got declined in front of someone you were trying to impress. I'm not sure I understand the question, I said. The accounts, Jack. They're frozen. All of them. The cabin's payment system is offline, the rental income's not hitting my account, and what? I prompted. And my mortgage payment just bounced, he snapped. This is costing me protection, I said calmly. The trust doesn't allow for irresponsible spending. Silence on the other end, then, what trust? The one you signed into, I replied. Remember? The papers you were so eager about. That was to transfer the assets to us, he said, his voice rising. No, I said, that was to place everything into an irrevocable trust, with me as the sole trustee. You were named contingent beneficiaries, but only if you met certain moral and financial conditions. You failed both. A muffled sound, probably Brent covering the receiver to bark something at Claire. A second later, she was on the line. Dad, she said, her voice softer than it had been in months. You can't just take it back. I didn't take anything back. You never had it. This is insane, she said. You're punishing us over, what? A vacation? Some home improvements? I let out a slow breath. You spent trust funds on personal luxuries. You drained accounts without oversight. You used property you don't own as if it were your own. And you left Sophie eating cold cereal while you two got dressed for a gala. That last one, that was the point I stopped even pretending. Her breath caught. You're making a mistake. We're family. I let the pause hang heavy before I answered. You stopped being family when you started circling me like a vulture. Brent cut back in, his temper overriding hers. You think you're clever, Jack. You think locking this up will stop us? We'll find a lawyer, and we'll. Already tried that, I interrupted. Martin drafted it airtight. Any lawyer you talk to will tell you the same thing, you signed away your own access. You'll never touch a dime until I'm gone, and I'm planning to be around for a long, long time. The line went dead. 2 weeks later, the fallout began in earnest. Brent's big property deal collapsed when he couldn't produce proof of funds. Claire had to step down from the luncheon committee when a personal check she wrote for decorations bounced. They sold their house soon after, too many payments, not enough income. Sophie still came to see me every weekend. We went fishing at the lake, played cards in the cabin, and she asked why Mommy and Daddy never came along anymore. I told her, some people don't know how to take care of the things they're given, sweetheart. So sometimes, those things have to be taken away. And though she didn't fully understand, I think she got the important part. They wanted my estate early. Now they will get nothing at all. It has been nearly a year since that dinner. Claire and Brent still do not speak to me unless absolutely necessary. Birthdays are awkward, holidays are quieter, and the old photographs of the cabin no longer hang in their hallway. But Sophie still comes. Every other Friday, she hops out of the car in the driveway, backpack bouncing, hair ribbons flying. She always runs to hug me like she is afraid I might disappear if she does not hold on tight enough. The first few times, Claire stayed in the driver's seat, eyes forward, engine idling. Lately, she just drops Sophie off without even pulling in. We spend those weekends at the cabin. We fish, we hike, we eat sandwiches on the dock and watch the sun pull the lake into gold. She asks questions about everything, the history of the cabin, the trucking routes I used to run, the way her grandmother liked her coffee. She listens. Really listens. One afternoon, while we were mending a fishing net, she asked, "Grandpa, why don't you let Mommy and Daddy take care of the cabin?" I looked at her, and for a moment, I saw Claire at that same age, trusting every word out of my mouth. "Because, sweetheart," I said, "when you're given something important, you have to take care of it. And if someone doesn't, you keep it safe until they learn how." She thought about that for a while. "When I'm old enough, can I take care of it?" I smiled. "If you keep that heart of yours, yes. You can take care of all of it." That night, while Sophie slept in the loft, I stood on the porch and listened to the wind in the pines. Maybe one day, she will be the kind of person I always hoped her mother would be, someone who knows that the real value of an inheritance is not in the money or the deeds, but in the trust behind them. And if that's the only legacy I leave behind, then maybe it's worth more than everything else combined.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to the story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.